podcast software is picking up the wrong mic, and so we had to play with it a little bit. So again, feel free and let us know if the audio is not coming in better than it was before. But as we were saying, we went ahead and created a forum post on our forums and asked you guys, the community, to give us questions about tribes that you felt hadn't been answered yet or that you had an interest in. We're getting the thumbs up that the audio is good now. So we'll just move right along. So Kaizen went ahead and pulled together about the top 30 questions off of that list. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take about the first 45 to 50 minutes of the hour, and we're going to address the questions that people have sent us through the forums. And then we'll take about the last 10 minutes and we'll allow people to go ahead and post follow-up questions on Twitch. So if you do have questions that you think of throughout the Q&A, make sure you make a note of them, and then sometime in the last 10 to 20 minutes we'll go ahead and ask you guys to post your questions, and that way we can grab them all towards the end and kind of curate accordingly. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the questions and see what we got. This is live, and actually we haven't taken a look at these questions yet, so you'll get a chance to gauge our honest reactions to these questions. So yeah, there's that. Also, I have been recovering from pneumonia, so I apologize in advance if I have to turn my head and cough. That's just, it's a side effect of pneumonia. So, all right, first question. Noble asks, can members of a secondary tribe within a kingdom be nobility? For example, can Naren characters in the wetlands become or start as nobility in the Teresk kingdom? Great question. The idea is, we've set up these kingdoms and these organizations, kingdoms, counties, and duchies, with the idea that they represent that region the most. And then there is the ability for there to be other tribes inside those regions. And so really it's a question of how much flexibility and control do the counts, kings, and dukes have when they're kind of establishing these origins. At this point, it's very important to us that the kings, counts, and dukes be representative of the primary tribes in that region, so that when people do meet them, they have a good understanding of where they come from, what culture they are, and things like that. We do expect, however, over the duration of the 10-year story, and probably sooner rather than later, that people will gradually work their way up into positions of leadership that are coming from the actual player base of the game, and not people who are invested in being a part of the kings and counts and dukes or the nobility at launch. So the short answer to your question is it's unlikely that we'll go ahead and allow people to be members of the other tribes as kings, counts, and dukes during the initial launch of the game, but we do look forward to people of all tribes working their way up to king, regardless of which settlement or domain that they live in.
And certainly some of the tribes have societies that are more xenophobic than others, so the likelihood of it happening in one area versus another is going to be different among kingdoms as well. Some of them are more of a melting pot, and so there would be an easier opportunity for somebody to raise that way, but
some of them for sure not.
Yeah, some of them for sure.
What I'm saying is don't try for some of them. Actually, please try.
It's really up to the players at that point.
I mean, it really is. I mean, certainly, the NPCs are going to respond a certain way, and we hope that the players kind of develop their own culture, and they either do or don't support this idea. But, from our perspective, at least at launch, the tribes have their own existing cultures, and some of them are going to be more receptive to the idea than others. Like, being a Rothi inside the tropical rainforest. Like, first of all, it's not going to work very well, but either way, the Genoa are not extremely receptive to outsiders trying to come in and take over. I mean, plus they're very much a combative organization, so you'd also have to be able to
uprisings.
Yeah, you'd have to stand toe to toe with them, and then pacify the people and prove to them why you're the best leader. And I think that'd be hard to do.
Yeah, especially if they have religious reasons for not accepting you.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Moving on. The next question, we got 3 in a row by Regis. Regis asked some fantastic questions in the community.
The most updated,
hey, Regis.
Person.
Yeah, a lot of great questions.
Sit down.
I don't know what they are, but I can see that they've been uprated a lot. So let's take a look at them. How would player skill versus character skill be reflected when it comes to specific attributes of the tribes? For example, Teresk are supposed to be the best ones in diplomacy. When it comes into a diplomacy fight between a PC and an NPC, I don't see any problem. But in PC versus PC, it will more likely come to the diplomacy skills of the players, which might not be the same as the characters. Checks would be okay, but how are you going to enforce the players to follow the result of the checks?
That's a great question.
That is a great question. So
role-playing versus role-playing.
Yeah, role-playing, but the characters versus role-playing.
Skills versus play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something I haven't taken a look at the questions, but I suspect is going to be a reoccurring theme, because we talked a lot during the tribe write-ups about how different tribes were stronger in some areas than others. And the physical ones is fairly straightforward. People always kind of assume that when a character is stronger, that they're going to be able to carry more, they can swing a weapon harder, they can do those physical skills easier, which is true. But when you talk about the soft skills, like leadership and charisma type checks and things like that. People often think about it from the perspective of player versus NPC, and it's harder to imagine how it would work from player versus player. The important thing to note is that we knew that, and a big percentage of the game is being invested in making sure that the kind of social elements, the social battles, if you will, are as important as the physical ones. So we've talked in the past about kind of the gossip system, which is a method of allowing players to aggregate truths and pass them from one person to another. So for example, I'm out in the forest and I see somebody attack another player. The fact that I saw that happen is a truth. And so I can come back into town and I can tell people, hey, I saw person A attacking person B, which will cause them to respond in kind. So NPCs will, call for alarms. They will, if they see that person, they'll either be not kill on sight, but they'll attack them. They'll be flagged as criminals and other things like that. However, if you're effectively persuasive enough, if your character's persuasion is high enough, you can come into town and say person A attacked person B when such an event never occurred. That will cause the NPCs and other players to respond the same. Now, NPCs is logical. Why would the other players respond the same? And the answer is because it uses a mechanic much like trading items, where you're trading information, you're passing almost a physical object which represents the knowledge from one person to another. And so when they receive that, the character themselves, their persuasion, or more specifically their intuition skill, is going to look at that truth and go, yeah, it's probably true. And so the player can still choose whether they want to doubt that or not, but at least from the character's perspective, what they're relaying to the player is, this is legit information. And so the more intuitive you are, the more likely you are to be able to suss out whether something is false information, and the more persuasive you are, the more likely you are to create or falsify information. And this applies to all of our mechanics, from forging signatures to telling lies, spreading gossips, to some of the more bardic skills that we're working on. So the idea is we're actually taking what would normally be considered social, like player v player skills, and we're kind of crystallizing them into the character to give them similar mechanics to what you'd see in a physical combat. A way for the players to determine whether or not their character thinks it's true, even if they don't. But at the same time, if somebody's giving you information and it says, hey, this is true information, more often than not, players should assume that information is true, because lying and things like that in the game will be more difficult than, for example, it would be in real life. If I'm on Discord and I'm talking to Vye, me saying something is true, she has no context of whether or not that's true or not. Really, there's, does she believe me as a player? But if I'm doing it through the in-game mechanics and I'm giving her that knowledge, she at least has the game mechanics to tell her that information is true. So it gives you a little bit more information and context about the likely true or falseness of a statement. Anything else? You guys mad?
No, that sounds good.
Sounds good.
All right. So I'll reflect back to that, I think, or refer back to that on a couple of these questions, because I think many of them are going to probably revolve around the same type of question. If they do, just know that the short answer is that we are actually working on mechanics to allow you to kind of gauge the social elements of the game. Okay, next question. Regis also asks, what do you have to say to pledged kings that are forced to be the kings of a tribe they don't like just because they didn't put up enough money to pump their influence? Specifically when we didn't know during Kickstarter that tribes, at the time called bloodlines, weren't going to be so radically different from each other, and we were all expecting slightly differences between humans. That's a great question. There's a couple ways I can answer that. The first of which is, the kings, the counts, and the dukes, we want to have a good relationship with them. We want to make sure that it's synergistic, because they're helping to build the background of our game. They're helping to fill in the history and the lore of that. But it's also kind of an opportunity as well. And regardless of what tribe they ultimately end up in, that's kind of a historical thing that we're hoping that they perceive as an opportunity. Just like any tribe that they were to be a part of, or any kingdom that they actually own. If we take the tribes out of it, any kingdom, any geography, any area that they're to own, it's just as likely that they're going to lose it. That's something that I think all the kings knew going into this, is that we weren't promising permanence. And whether or not we're talking about the king or the tribe, at some point, some information, we want to give them the best opportunity, but we can't guarantee the same tribe for everybody, and there will be choices that are made. And at the same time, not all members of a kingdom, like a physical geographic area, not all the members of that are going to be of the same tribe. There's going to be diversity in all the kingdoms. And so, it's not like you have to assume that every member of your kingdom, county, or duchy are all going to be that tribe. There will be some diversity, Narrans, Hrothi in some regions, and others. So there's a little bit more flexibility as you go down the hierarchy of nobility to the players. The kings are somewhat limited, as are the dukes and the counts, but once you start getting down into the mayoral and the general player base, I think people are going to find that if they want to play a specific tribe in a biome, as long as it's a tribe that can or will likely be in that biome, that they've got some flexibility of choice. And then regarding the last part, specifically, we didn't know during Kickstarter that tribes weren't going to be so radically different from each other, and we're all expected slightly differences between humans. I don't know that we've gone too radically far. I think the play experience of some of them is different than what people might have imagined early on, but I don't feel like we've changed anything in the design. It's kind of always what we were communicating. But I think that's something that we can have a discussion about. I mean, I ultimately want to make sure that all the kings and counts and dukes are going to have a positive experience, but at the same time, it's not a game we're creating. It's a world, and the world has some constraints. You know, if it were just a game, then we could flip some bits and kind of set whatever we wanted to make sure every single player was happy. But you know, we do ultimately want this to be a living, breathing world, and in order for that to happen, there has to be constraints that we don't have control over. And one of those is, you know, whether or not every king, count, or duke can play the tribe that they want to at launch.
Well, I mean, that's sort of reflective of our overall design.
Sure.
Which is that you don't always get what you want. So, I don't think there's really anything to be apologetic about. From my perspective, I think
Well,
we haven't done anything outside of what we said we would, which was
Sure.
we never commented on
Yeah.
how we were going to design tribes or.
I mean, life is what you make of it. In real life, you don't get to choose what nationality you are. You don't get to choose your name most of the time. You don't get to choose what country that you were born in. These are things that, as a human on Earth, you don't get the opportunity to do so. And we're making a lot of those available because it is a game, it is a virtual world. But it's really what you make of it, what you take and you do from there. Once you have your existence, your being, then everything else from there is you and your choice and your decisions and how you choose to move forward.
That's a good point. And that's true, I think, also for people after launch. You know, after launch, the way you get in is through the character creation process, and you literally just pick the family that you want. So, you know, your ability to fine-tune your character is going to be way different in this game than it is in most games. You know, a lot of games, you've got the skill sliders, and you can customize just the character you want. In this game, the customization happens after you get into the world. You know, if you want to be good at certain sets of skills, if you want to be a certain level of fitness, you have to do those things after the game launches, but you have less control over what happens during character creation.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, in a traditional tabletop role-playing game, you know, people kind of sit down and they put numbers in a bunch of boxes and they create their name and they come up, you know, they min-max their stats and their advantages and everything like that. And you come up with some characters that don't necessarily have any business being in a civilization together because they are all sort of created apart from one another. So what we're trying to introduce is relationships and a society and civilization such that it makes sense that this world exists and these characters coexist together, whether friendly or not, and that by removing by providing constraints versus removing, I guess, some options, we're helping to create a more vibrant world and to create something that the stories that you make are yours. They're not anybody else's.
Right. I think that segues nicely into Regis' last question. And it's clear Regis' questions are all kind of centered around this idea of the kingdoms and the kind of the exposition period of time, and or at least the settlement and domain selection, which I think it's important to call out, really only affects somewhere between 20 and a couple hundred people. So as much as the first part of this Q&A has been about that, I know that this doesn't affect the largest percentage of people out there. So it's important to call out that if you're hearing these questions and it's starting to raise a concern for you about how much ability you have to choose what region you started in the game or what tribe you play, please know that for the vast majority, like 98% of the population, the answer to these questions aren't going to apply to you, and you pretty much have the opportunity to pick any tribe you want, part of any family you want, in any kingdom you want. So these constraints solely exist for the people that are coming in as nobility and aristocracy and helping us build out the world. And the reality is that there is a responsibility there as well as an opportunity. You know, in order to make the world feel real, those people have to kind of accept that there are constraints in place, like you were saying, and that, you know, it doesn't give us the opportunity to let them have complete control over the world. The world is constraining things, not us. But I know it may not feel that way. But let me get on to Regis' last question. He says, from the very beginning, I always had the impression that players would be driving the world, that a pledged king was going to be able to create the kingdom they wanted. Now we have these tribes with all these restrictions. That to me looks like they're taking the freedom from players. Did I get it all wrong, or did something change in the middle? I kind of feel like you got it all wrong. The idea has always been for the players to come in as the kings, counts, and dukes in the beginning and help shape the world, you know, customize the kingdoms, identify, for example, you know, whether or not the kingdom focused on diplomacy or was militant, whether they focused on education or politics, whether they focused on the dance of dynasties or were more passive. Similar to the dukes, determining, you know, what kind of military strategies they had and things like that. And then the counts and mayors kind of, you know, fleshing out there, figuring out how their city was going to work, what kind of trade or craft that they were going to work on, allowing these people to kind of customize customize those things. But ultimately, I mean, the idea that the kingdoms exist within certain biomes has always been there, and those biomes have always been constraints over what kind of craft or craft or trade. Like, if you were planning to be a desert tribe, for example, and you were also planning to be the best, I don't know, like, lumberjack in the world, and you probably were missing that those constraints exist there. The fact that we've added the tribes we added to add a cultural flavor to the game, as well as to make the play experiences of them unique. Not because we just wanted them to be unique, because in most cases they necessarily have to be unique in order to survive in that biome. But the biomes and the bloodlines were things that have always been there. I think we were just it's not that we weren't forthcoming, but I think people were surprised at how much of an impact that those tribes had on the game. But keep in mind that what we're trying to do with this is set up the world at launch, and we've identified these cultural restrictions and things, but the players are ultimately free to, on launch day or in exposition, to take the cultures that we've created and change them as they feel necessary. We have no illusions that the cultures or the tribes that we create on launch day are going to be there indefinitely. We expect and hope that the players will drive away from that, or to something that suits that particular server or that particular region in a way that kind of makes more sense for them. So I think on one hand, maybe you assumed that on launch day the kings would be able to come in and just kind of customize everything, and that all of them could potentially be homogenous, and that they would all feel the same if all of the kings wanted them to be the same, and that's not the case. But at the same time, I think it's important to underscore that, even with these constraints, don't assume that these constraints are permanent. We definitely want the kings to be able to customize to the degree that they would like, and the counts and the dukes as well. But ultimately, we're creating a world, and we have to work together, and the constraints exist in order to make the world feel realistic and different and diverse. And
I mean, in order
also
to
game balance.
Yeah, in order
This is a
to
balancing thing.
in order to create the foundation for the gameplay, the mechanics, the biomes, that affect everything, like the survival mechanics, it affects what trades are going to be viable in your area. There's a lot that comes from just what the world is like in the area that you live, and it made sense, and it has always made sense for the tribes to also be suited to their biomes. And so there was never an intention to have the kings be able to come in and say, okay, well, in this desert, I want this guy that looks like a brood bear there because I think that's cool, because we're building something that's more based around science, and so we want there to be a reason that the tribe that lives in the desert would look like that, and that basically there's no evolutionary reason why somebody in the desert would look like a brood bear, none. So that is a constraint that is being done. So if you're choosing an area or you're choosing a particular look for a tribe, then you're not necessarily going to be able to put wherever on the map. But that's just the foundation. And that's so that we can create a compelling world, so that we can create balanced mechanics, that we can create something that is interesting to then build upon. And that's where the nobility comes in, and the players in general come in, is taking that foundation, taking these flags that we placed around the world, saying this tribe's like this and this biome's like that, and then moving them from there wherever they want to be. And certainly some people are going to like the flag exactly where it is, and other people are not. But this is, again, creating opportunities, it's creating stories, it's creating challenges and conflict. That's the whole point of the game, is to work through these things, not to just set up your dream kingdom and then pat yourself on the back and walk away. It's about the stories that you tell, and playing the game is what you should strive to do. Not getting to the end game. There's no end game. The end game starts from day one. It's not about that. It's about all the journeys and all the stories that you tell along the way, including how you either gel with or overcome your cultural and societal struggles.
Nice. All right, I think we've
Yep.
dedicated enough time to this.
All right, so the next question is from UDL Alkaline. He asks, with regard to the lost tribes, how will they develop prior to discovery? If, for example, several real-life years pass before they're found, what can we expect the AI to do with all this time? Will they advance in tech, expand their empires, and combat the other lost tribes for limited resources? Could they even wipe out a lost tribe before first contact?
They're probably not going to wipe out any lost tribes, but
I think we should make sure that they don't. It would be really cool, a great story that nobody would know. And really, we'd like you guys to know the cool stories that happen.
also we designed the tribes so players can play them. But as for the answer to the rest of the questions, possibly all of those. But you're not going to know until you find out, because they're they're not found. They're lost tribes. I mean, ultimately,
I don't think there's a single answer.
Yeah.
I think different tribes, some of the tribes will probably advance in terms of technology and things as we play, and I think others are less likely to do so, and they're all going to be in a state of flux. It also might be different per server.
Right.
So I think it would be unfair for us to commit to one answer or the other on that, because
Absolutely.
I think if we tell you they're going to be just as like technically advanced as you are by the time you discover them, if for one reason or another they're not, then you're going to feel like you lost out on an opportunity to leverage new technology. And if we tell you they're not, and it turns out that they kept up with you guys, then you're going to have this vision of being able to swarm in and just kind of totally dominate this like lost tribe. And then when there's resistance, you might feel like we misled you there. So I think the best answer is when you discover them, you'll know.
well, keep in mind, that's like asking, what is the other team doing in a StarCraft game, like, or what is Egypt doing in my Civ game? Well, like, you don't know, and you're not supposed to know. It's
So wait
secret
and see.
for a reason. Yeah, wait and see.
When the fog of war reveals itself, you'll know.
Exactly.
It's kind of a cop-out answer, but it's the right answer.
But
the
it's
right
the true.
answer.
It's the
Yeah,
true answer.
It is. All right, Imshada asks, on the subject of the Weird, how do you foresee ensuring that the communal property mechanics remain manageable for the aristocracy and nobility, especially in larger pre-existing settlements such as county or duchy seats? What do the organizational leadership duties of the Weird noble look like at that scale? So the Weird is a great question. Really just the topic of the Weird in general is one of those that I like talking about.
I found that after we released the Weird, it kind of opened a lot of people's eyes about like, oh, these are broad mechanical changes, not just flavor text that we were releasing in the tribes.
Yeah, I think
Just
up until
wait
that
for the
one,
4 lost tribes.
like we talked about in the last Q&A, each tribe we released, they started out as very simple, very like non-complex in terms of how they related to traditional RPG mechanics, and then as we released the tribes, they gradually got more and more sophisticated, and they require a higher level of play. If you kind of want to play an MMO like you've always played it, you want to get in, you want to do the whole farming thing, and you want to learn a craft or trade and run a store, the Naren are perfect for you. You want to breed horses or whatever, Naren are fine. Like, that's not going to be a problem. But as you kind of expand out into the later tribes, they do require kind of a more savvy, more kind of high-level understanding of how player versus player mechanics work in a game like this. And by the time we got to the Weird, I think people were like, wow, this is way different than anything else, which is good.
They're like, how am I supposed to protect my stuff
Right.
if I'm a Weird? Don't play that tribe.
Don't play the tribe, yeah. So there's 2 answers to the Weird, and I'll give you both of them. One is kind of the way it is today, and the other one is the way it could be tomorrow. And I'm doing this so that you understand that playtesting is very important to us, and we do ultimately want to make sure that the tribes are balanced, asymmetrically balanced, but at least playable. So the first answer I'll give you is, the Weird are a completely different playstyle than any other tribes. And kingdoms that are made up predominantly of the Weird should understand that what the Weird possess as a tribe is information, it's knowledge. It's that system we were just talking about where they've observed things and they've got that information and they've passed that information on as true and false and things like that. So their entire, I guess if you will, armory or inventory is all about the things that the characters know. That's not something you can steal. So you can't walk into someone's tent and take the information that character knows. And so the focus of that tribe is all about things that are not visible on the game map. It's not there. It's not something that can be stolen. And so as a result, they value possessions much less than the other kingdoms or tribes would. And so if you're planning to play the Weird, you need to come at it from the mindset of all physical objects in the world are perishable and everything can be lost. There's no value in the things that I own. Because they can be taken at any time or they can be used at any time. Now, that's not to say that we expect the members of the Weird to just run around randomly stealing things from each other. And there is this concept of stealing still. Like, as much as they're a collective community and they share resources and things like that, we don't want to imply that, just walking up to somebody and taking something off their body, or they set something down and you pick it up, that's legit. Like, there will be mechanics to help monitor that to a degree, but it is a communal society, and they all recognize that the possessions that they have are for the benefit of everyone. But that being said, the things that are not the benefit of everyone are the things that you cannot see. So the first thing I will say is, if you're planning to focus heavily on their material possessions, whether or not it be furniture or housing or weapons or whatever, if your focus is on those types of things, the Weird are probably not for you. I would say focus on a tribe that cares about those things. The other answer I'll give you, though, is we also understand that the kings and counts and dukes have EP, virtual currency, that they're using to plan to build up their tribes and their settlements and their kingdoms and things like that. And we don't want them to feel like there's no value in those things. So whether or not it's adding things to the mechanics that allow them to spend that, like starting the world with a certain amount of, or starting the game with a certain amount of information and knowledge, like they've already had spies in the world and so they already have some collective amount of knowledge, or if it's managing to manipulate the weird mechanics a little bit so that, let's say, not all information or not all possessions can be taken or are communal. One of the things we talked about internally is having a mechanic of generations, for example, where the younger generation can't take things from older generations, only their lateral generations and below. And so that means that if you're starting the game as one of the kings or counts or dukes, you have personal possessions that can only be used by, for example, you or your superiors, but not for the people who are members of your tribe that aren't older or of a higher generation. So there are all kinds of mechanics that we can still manipulate with on the Weird to make them feel like they're balanced but also fair and that they're desirable to play. That said, we're not heading in that direction yet. Playtesting is something that we'll be doing in the not too distant future. I can't give a date on that just yet, but feel free to check out the State of Elyria on Wednesday to learn more about that. Yeah, so we want people to get into the world and see how the tribes play before we start making radical changes on those things. Because as it is right now, we recognize that they are a different tribe, but we don't think that's bad. You know, we think that there is a group of people who want to play that tribe, and for now we're just going to wait and see how many of those there are.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are some great advantages to knowing, like, being able to communicate easily with everybody in your settlement, being able to share weapons and equipment and other things with everybody in your settlement from, you know, pretty much anywhere. So it can be used for great advantage, but it does come with some costs, right? And that you have to change your mind about some things and what it means to own something, but it works both ways, so yeah.
Cool. Atlas Forgiven asks, once a new tribe is discovered, what will be the mechanics for players being born into the new tribes? Will only the discovering group or kingdom be able to spawn birth in them, or is the option unlocked for the whole server? The plan now, at this moment, is for it to be unlocked for the whole server. So, similar to when players do their character creation initially, they select the family that they want, they identify the occupations and things like that, and that gives them the map to choose from. Well, once the fog of war, so to speak, is revealed for that new settlement within that new continent or wherever it happens to be, then the next people who go in to do character creation will be able to see those other tribes in order to create NTCs, or to consume an NTC rather, or if there are children of a viable age, then they can go ahead and create alternates if they want to and take over as the children of those new tribes. So that's the story as it is today. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about story points in the past and how those are used to create NTCs. So if people have story points accumulated, then they'd be able to burn those in order to take over NTCs of higher, more prominent positions of power inside the new settlement, if they're available. Cool.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Another question from Mshada. With respect to the Shadow War trait of the Weird, it states that their cultural and religious tenets prohibit them from waging war on the battlefield. Mechanically, what is the dividing line between allowed and prohibited forms of warfare? Are small-scale guerrilla warfare and raising militias to defend settlements exceptions to this rule, or would they still count as doing battle? This is specifically about pitched battles. There is a battlefield mechanic, which we've talked about a little bit in the past for things like, you know, when you're trying to declare war over the boundaries or borders of a specific reason, and it creates a battlefield, and then the leadership is there, and that grants their aura to people around them so that their death penalty is different and things like that. Let me be clear. The Weird have no problem doing guerrilla warfare. They have no problem being behind enemy lines. They have no problem doing any of those things, but what they won't be is on a staged battlefield. So I think that it's important to note that you won't see them in a war of like Naren versus so-and-so, but you will still see them in combat.
You won't see them.
You won't see them. Right. Being on the battlefield would be too opaque, right? Like you'd just be right there. But being behind enemy lines, but not on the battlefield, that's something a little bit different.
If you had a really compelling Naren disguise,
right,
then I suppose you could be conscripted into the Naren army and fight.
That's another valid point. We say the Weird won't participate in pitched battlefield, but a pitched battlefield battle. But that doesn't mean that they're not.
I'm not the Weird.
I'm not.
My name is Jacob Jacobson.
Right.
Naren
extraordinaire. Right. All right. Magic Storm asks, offspring.
You know how you get them, right? You're like, how you doing? Oh, we're good. I mean, I'm good.
Wow.
Oh, Jacob.
That's a good Weird joke.
Jacob,
yeah.
I'm on to you.
So do different tribes have different fertility rates and family sizes? Interesting. Is one tribe more likely to have twins or triplets, whilst another might struggle to have one?
That's such a...
And end of that, do say the Broodveer have many children owing to being like packs, whilst the Naren might only have one or two being relatively nomadic.
There are multiple size packs, first of all. So this connotation that packs have lots and lots of them, that's
Correct.
not necessarily true. A pack could be a couple of people.
So,
More income.
two things. Right now, there is no difference in the fertility rates of the different genomes, so all of them can have family members of the same size. However, there was a period of time where when we were doing the design for the different mechanics, that we did play with the idea of different tribes having different fertility rates. So
it's an interesting idea.
I mean, I think again, it's a way of balancing, and actually there is some sense to that, especially in areas that are less hospitable or have less resources.
Yeah. Do you want to tell them about the one
Now,
fertility mechanic that
we
we had
have
talked
so
about?
many questions left.
I mean, it's a quick thing.
It's
I
not
think
quick.
it's worth mentioning.
Of course, you think it's worth mentioning.
That's what I have.
I liked the idea of providing some alternative reproductive stuff
Right.
in different tribes, and on the Turesk in particular, we were thinking that there could be no difference between male or female as far as being able to create a child.
Right.
So
Androgynous.
Androgynous.
Either gender will work.
Androgynous.
Because
Yeah.
we knew that there were a lot of people that didn't necessarily want to play the male or female mechanic, and so just being able to have two Turesk just always be able to create offspring, we thought was an interesting mechanic. But
and
ultimately,
their whole culture is really not.
Yeah.
It's not about patrilineage or matrilineage or anything.
Right.
It's about like what can you do,
right.
and how much do you have? How much money do you have?
So, anyways, that was played around with for a while. We ultimately cast it aside because we felt like it would be difficult to balance relative to the other tribes. It's difficult to weigh kind of what advantages that provides versus doesn't. So we held off on that. But to
Also,
give you an
it's
idea,
like science.
I mean, this is a fantasy world.
Yeah.
I mean, all right, moving on. Gung Ho asks, with wars going to happen, tribes are very different levels of balance. One tribe able to be in full plate and have very nice iron swords, and one tribe having best armor being bone or turtle shell. How do you foresee it being possible to balance these? Is it realistic, or is it going off of fantasy defensiveness? I think the best way to answer that question isn't about what they have, is where they're doing it. If you've got the people who are all in full plate, and they're roaming through the desert in order to invade like the Weird, I think they're going to be at a disadvantage regardless of how strong their plate mail is. Likewise, if you've got the Naren heading into the tropical rainforest with their chain mails and leathers on,
That's gonna suck.
It's going to suck. So I think you have to consider that the biomes dictate to a large extent what makes sense in that world, and that's going to require in many cases for the people to become comfortable in the new biome before they start trying to invade. If you try and invade right off the bat without having prepared to be there, then you're going to be at a disadvantage.
Right. Like, I mean, if the Genoa were to just like rush across grasslands in a bunch of leather and bone armor and a bunch of like mounted, plated knights
Yeah.
of Naren knights, that would be a poor tactical decision, and they should suffer for that. Like, I mean, one, that's not really Genoan style, but it's not necessarily going to be totally fair.
The answer is,
For
of
you.
course, equipment is imbalanced. Duh. And
Be
leather
nice.
is not as strong. Well, as in leather is absolutely not as protective as metal. And that's just, yes.
What about pleather? Never mind. All right. Dr. Quick asks, with all these tribes based primarily on biomes and kingdoms separated by primarily a combination of biomes and geographical features, my question is this. Awkward page turn. Do you expect domain land selection to have an overall percentage of tribes in a kingdom be listed? And if so, will that make up settlements of purely one or another tribe, or will that be an overall makeup of population across all example? Okay, let's hit the example.
Oversimplified.
What?
A 80% Naren kingdom that is also 10% Hrothi and 10% Kipik, with those percentages derived from either 8 Naren settlements, 1 Kipik, 1 Hrothi, or in contrast 10 settlements with mixed populations. Okay, so I think the question he's ultimately asking is inside mixed kingdoms, do we see there being such that each settlement or domain is roughly broken up into multiple tribes, or do we think that there will be pockets of exclusive tribes inside of those kingdoms? I think both could happen, but I think ultimately you're more likely to see percentages of all the settlements. So I think you're less likely to see like a purely Kipik kind of settlement inside of a Naren region, but you might see Kipik living in amongst the Naren. And I say that because the biomes that they're acclimated towards, you wouldn't find specific pockets of those, I think, necessarily in those. So for example, if somebody from the Genoa were to move up into the grasslands and be living inside and among the Naren, they're not going to be like grouping up inside of a like tropical rainforest little alcove inside of the grasslands. They're going to have to kind of spread out in order to find a society or a way of life that works for them. So
They might. I mean, sometimes immigrants set up communities
That's what I say, it might
within
happen.
a population, and it could mean that they basically take over an entire settlement.
yes.
But that'll be really up to the players.
Yeah, the procedural world generation system right now would not do that. The way it's designed currently, you would get a mix of multiple tribes. In all the settlements, you wouldn't find exclusive settlements that are specifically one tribe or another.
Yeah.
Cool. Back to Inshada. Man, we got a couple people who just asked great questions.
Imshada is just.
Imshada asks, in the Weird write-up, the description of the told, Gentry said...
They're all three about Weird.
I know. Well, I mean, Imshada is very much tied to the Weird. I think it's pretty clear that he's the Weird. All right, in the Weird write-up, the description of the told, the Gentry says, once a member of the Weird has demonstrated their commitment to the Weird by renouncing their individual possessions and contributing their land to the collective, they are added to the told. This seems to imply that the named do still have personal property. Is this a correct interpretation? And if so, are the named still able to access areas and supplies owned by the commune in addition to their own property?
No.
Great question. The answer is exactly what you think. The named still have their possessions and they do not have access to the shared population. So that's one way that people can technically still hold on to this stuff. However, you can't move up inside the Were society as like a mayor or, like you said, the named or the like going to the told and above. You can't move up if you're still tied to your possessions. Like that's required in order to move up, as we've designed it. But whether or not the players choose to commit to that is something that only they'll be able to decide.
Yes.
Cool. Moonchaser, we hear from somebody new. Moonchaser asks, if I've got a foreign surrogate and conceive his child, raise the child not as part of my family but of his, what bonus will it get from me? Of genetic nature, cultural, basic survival for the biome only, or also skill bonuses for e.g. blacksmithing, if I'm good at that while the child's father isn't? That is, can you raise the child, train them in the raising phase, and send them off without ever becoming part of your family and family chat? Great question.
We talked about this before.
Yeah, so...
That sweet surrogate money. That's not a joke, by the way.
So, regarding the biological stuff, the biological stuff is passed on the same always. So, when you create your character and it takes the genetic makeup from both parents, it's going to pass on things like whether or not they have predispositions towards certain hair color, eye color, strength, attributes, and things like that. So, all that stuff will pass along. In terms of the culture that they are going to be a part of, if you were to have a surrogate that raises them elsewhere, they'd be a part of a different family. And so that family is ultimately, that culture, the culture that raised them would dictate things like their religion and other stuff. As to what skills they learn, every family has the opportunity to teach or to mentor their children into the skills that they want them to learn through sending them to schools and things like that once they get of age. So you'll be able to customize that stuff to a degree while they're still NPCs. That being said, it would be the skill set of the people who ultimately raise them that would be determining kind of what their skill set is, I think.
Right, so if you were like a master warrior and you had a child but it was raised out elsewhere, it wouldn't necessarily be a master warrior, more easily able to become a master warrior if you put them like in a farm town.
Right. The skills that they're accustomed to, that they're surrounded by, are the skills that they're going to learn, not necessarily the ones of the biological parents. But you can still change that by sending them off to school and things like that.
Yeah.
All right. K-Van asks, given the huge diversity in shapes and size of the tribes, will it still be possible to disguise yourself as a member of another tribe, and to what extent? It will still be possible to disguise yourself as another member of the tribe. As to what extent? Pretty holistically. However, if you're a Kipik trying to disguise yourself as a Yoru, it's going to require some degree of technology or something else to help you.
If you're anyone trying to disguise Yoru.
I just thought of like the two kids in the trench coat.
That's exactly right. Or stilts or something like that.
I'm a Yoru. I thought you guys only survived up in the north.
Yeah. Right.
I'm a Yoru.
You're blue. The paint on your face is coming off. The idea is that all the tribes should be able to disguise themselves as all of the tribes to reason. You'll note, though, however, that we've actually called out specific disadvantages amongst the larger tribes. So, for example, the Yoru have a specific negative trait that prevents them from being in disguise. So, like, they cannot use disguises at all, because you're not going to be a Yoru and be like, "Hey, I'm a Kipik."
You're not fooling anyone.
You're not fooling anyone.
Like they can maybe disguise. Could they disguise themselves as a tree?
Right.
Maybe.
I'm like a Trent, like Trents.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah.
The blue one. So the short answer is that the shorter tribes and the moderate tribes will be able to disguise themselves as one another through face paint and other things. The larger tribes tend to not be able to disguise themselves as well.
That said, an astute eye would be able to see through, potentially, a disguise.
High intuition.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is where skills come in.
Well,
right. And the character communicating it too.
If you look at someone disguise themselves as Genoa, but Genoas generally have large upper bodies and longer arms. Even if they have a similar face with a striping, you might be able to discern.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Cool. Corian asks, do you plan to add some universal gestures to use when meeting strangers? I mean you no harm. Get lost or else. or when trying to communicate with tribes speaking different languages, pointing to food, etc. Absolutely. The animators love the fact that we're building a game with different languages and requiring them to make gestures and things like that. But you'll totally see a full set of like, I want to eat, or you go over there, or I'm going to kill you now. So those are things that we know we're going to need off the bat. The full set of which I'm sure Vye would love to create, because that's totally in our wheelhouse.
Follow-up question.
Right.
Do all gestures mean the same in every
Right, like if I'm doing this,
and
like
you're like, yeah, and it's
that's
like,
cool
you
to
just
the
challenged
Genoa.
me to a duel.
So-
To the death.
this is
So-
like hi, or like I'm gonna kill you.
That's something we still need to talk about.
Food?
Um,
Food? What was that about my mother? Food?
That's a real life problem. Like there are some places in our world where like shaking your head no means yes, and shaking your head yes means no. So that
or
type
doing
of
like the
miscommunication.
peace sign
Right.
is like. Not.
So we understand that those things exist in our world. They could be fun to do in game, but only to the point where we'd code it. It'd be funny the first time, and then after that,
Players
people
will
would
know
realize.
what they mean.
Right, and so
Yeah.
I don't see us spending time doing
There's
that
not
sort
a
of thing.
lot of.
The return on investment is really low.
investment there.
It's just like, yeah. There's
So
a meta
it
line.
would probably be universal symbols just for the sake of quicker development.
That's
Yeah.
not to say though that you guys couldn't decide as a society, as a culture,
Right.
to change the meaning of a particular thing internally.
That'd be funny.
Yeah.
Because then, like, you know that it means something, but anybody who's a visitor would not know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Alright.
would be funny.
All right. This one's actually, the name on this one is A Programmer's Nightmare. There is an endless debate on whether or not CHR means char or car.
I mean, if it's short for character, then it's
Right. It's car.
Char.
But nobody actually says that. They always say char.
Char.
So,
Care,
char.
care.
I'm going to go with char
At that
char,
point,
because that's how I would pronounce it.
character.
Care.
Care.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, char, care, or car,
Car.
depending on how you look at it. Asked, I understand that if a school discovers something, then it belongs to everyone, and if a guild discovers something, then it belongs to the guild until the patent runs out. However, the Canothian, the Kippic school of alchemy, is solidly in Kippic territory, so if they discover gunpowder, would the technology only be given to the Kippic kingdoms, or would they share it with everyone, including their enemies? Point of clarification, the patent stuff that we had talked about way long ago was cut from scope. The guild stuff is slightly different now, the idea being that they have access to it and they can use it in certain ways, but the patent technology mechanic doesn't exist currently. That being said, the mechanic behind schools is not that the whole world gains access to it, it's everybody who participates in the school. So, for example, at the Canothian, if somebody were to discover, let's say, gunpowder, then any students at that school who are registered with that school would have access to it automatically. Their enemies, however, would not. Unless you've got your enemies in your school, in which case you probably need to go back to school, because that was a bad idea.
spies, send spies.
Yeah. So Yari asks, or Jari, I'm going to go with Yari because that's how I would pronounce it. Yari asks, how diverse in terms of tribal variants will settlement populations be? At the center or capital, in large settlements, you'll see some diversity because that's typically where the trade routes will end. And then along the path of travel, like trade routes, you'll typically see a little bit more diversity. As you go to the outskirts, away from like the center of a settlement, or excuse me, the center of a domain, and away from the trade routes, you're going to find that there is much less diversity. It could range anywhere from 1% to 50%. I mean, it's gonna vary widely, as it would in our world. Markov asks, asking again from previous Q&A, we must have missed this question before. Some Harathian Weird land will be located in caves. Will that land be seen on the domain selection map, or will only the surface possible to see? So the domain selection stuff will show the cave structure. It will not show the individual caves, but you will be able to identify that you're picking a settlement that is located in caves.
Right.
Atlas Forgiven asks, will previously undiscovered tribes bring with them new technological development upon discovery?
Potentially.
Yeah. Potentially, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if they got the technology, then they got the technology.
And they may or may not be willing to share it.
Depends on, how that goes.
Good idea to maybe like, bring a
Ingratiate
peace,
yourself.
peace offering at first, not
Yeah.
just like immediately start stabbing a tribe that you just discovered.
Cool.
I don't know. It's up to you guys.
But that's, up to you.
All right. Pardon. Markov asking again from the previous Q&A. Apparently we missed his questions from the previous Q&A.
we only
We had a
answered
long
some,
list. Yeah, no, for sure. So I'm glad he got a chance to
And
ask
we
him
did
again.
tell people, like, put your
Put
questions
your
up
questions on
again.
it. And I'm glad they were upvoted because I don't like missing people's questions. So he asked again, EP price of parcel of land depends on the tier of that parcel. But with the description of tribes, we also discovered that what might be a low tier parcel for a tribe might not be a low tier parcel for another tribe. Will the EP price of land be universal, or will it depend on the tribe of the buyer or the area that the token is used? Example, will all Dross land be cheap because it's swamp, or will swamp be cheap outside of Dross land but normal values in Dross land? Great question. It's all relative. So the way it actually works is around settlements, the value of land is higher, and then inside of a single biome, there is going to be high value land and low value land. So for example, if you're the Teresk, land that's not containing any water might be higher value than land that is entirely water or that's mixed. Whereas if you're, a member of the Kipik, having land with more trees might be more valuable than land with fewer trees. And so it's very much different by biome and by the tribes. So the short answer to that is that swampland could actually be of different value in different biomes depending upon whether or not it makes sense to be in a swamp in that biome or not.
Yeah,
So,
but could that mean then that somebody who is not Dross, like a Genoa comes in for whatever reason,
Right.
and they see swampland as very cheap, and so they can buy a lot with their EP, and then there's this random Genoa living
because the
on
swampland would
a
be
massive expanse of land in the swamps.
So no, it'd be of high value there because inside the Dross lands, the swamp is valuable land. It's cultivated, it's farmland.
Yeah,
Like I
but
can
not
grow my
by
rotten tomatoes.
not the Dross.
No.
Land is, it's the value is what the people give it.
So yeah, it's all relative to the
arbitrary.
people around them.
Yeah.
Cool. I feel like that was answered.
Yeah.
So, Hexprone asks, you've provided detailed description of the very different art styles of the various tribes. However, the back rewards for Bloodlines are still described in terms of heraldry, and all player-created content I've seen has followed the format of a European-style coat of arms. Great question. We do universally use a heraldry.
Will nobility of different tribes be given differing art assets to create their in-game heraldry, matching what's in the tribal descriptions?
Great
For example, wooden totems for Broodbeer, inlaid stonework for Hrothi, tapestries for the Kipik, and if that's the case, goes on. What happens when a kingdom with an existing coat of arms selects a tribe with a different art style? Will players need to revise designs they may by that point have been using for some years? Or will the different tribes' heraldry be of a uniform European design, just expressed in different materials according to the tribe's specialty? There's
Great
a lot more
question.
to that.
There was a lot more to that. I was fine. It didn't actually add any more to the question.
There was not a question actually.
They
on
gave
the
some
other
back-
page. It was just
Well,
a
no, there
statement.
was. There was. The answer to that is that we have a single tool that we use for the heraldry designs. The tool will allow for different materials and things like that. So you're right that it would be on wood, it'd be on cloth, it'd be on different places. And in terms of the actual things that are visible on the coat of arms would probably be tribe or region specific. We don't have that stuff added yet. Like, we haven't spent any time developing the art. But from conversations that I've had with our art director, my assumption is at this point that if you are Dross, then the types of things you'd be able to choose from on your coat of arms using the coat of arms tool would be things that would be specific and relevant to the Dross, while if you're Naren, there would be things specific to there, and like you'd see wheat and
horses and things like that, whereas a member of the Dross or Genoa, you wouldn't have horses in your coat of arms and things like that.
Right. I think
The
the idea behind the coat of arms template is more, if you take the European coat of arms, it's got the shield and it's got the supports, it's got the helmet and
Right.
all the different pieces, those
The pieces exist.
those regions, those areas, the place of putting things is going to be universal.
Right.
And it is going to follow
Interesting.
probably.
No, it's definitely
yeah, it will follow the European heraldic design.
All coat of arms are going to follow the European coat of.
Well,
But
so,
the shapes
yeah.
that actually end up in those places, even though it's the shield section in the normal heraldry crest creation, it could be a totally different shape.
Yeah,
or
up to
style.
the Genoa, it could be a crosscut of tree. So, you see a circular shape with, bark on the outside. So you can still draw on it, what your coat would be or, your crest would be on it. Not crest, but what your actual field would be. But it's not going to be on something that looks like a shield. And similarly, the supports on the outside, while it might look like standing horses or unicorns or something like that for, the Narens, it could be something entirely different. Could be spiral cobra or boa constrictors or something like that.
That same
Or
layout.
But
arrows
same
or
layout.
something. Yeah, the layout is going to be the same as European heraldic design, but the actual bits and pieces that you put in there are going to have patterns and shapes and stuff that are more tribal.
Cool.
Verev.
Cleom.
Cleome?
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Cleome. Is the religious leadership different from the political leadership? Depends on the tribe. In the case of the Naren, not necessarily. For the rest of them, I think pretty universally they're different. Dross maybe not, but for the most of the other ones.
Yeah.
Will religious beliefs, laws, customs be modifiable at a local level? They will be. If yes, by whom? The count, mayor, town council, local religious leaders, or perhaps the owner of the church shrine?
Depends.
Yeah, part of it depends, part of it's yet to be determined. We want player customization, we want people to be able to go in and modify that, but different tribes value those positions in different ways. So I don't know yet, but the answer is that they will be overwritten. They are things that we want players to be able to control over time. And I do know that, for example, in the case of the Naren, that the cultural, the religious leaders play a prominent role in the overall political nature of the tribe. Verav asks, how will another religion question, awesome. How will the religious leaders of each tribe be able to tell if their followers are obeying the rules? For example, if a Hrothi quits the Vertori religion to avoid being punished for their vices, will the local religious leaders find out? That relates back to that question I was telling people about earlier. So if somebody witnesses you committing a sin against your religion, then they can communicate that to the religious leaders. Or they cannot see you do that and communicate it to the religious leaders. Heresy.
Right.
Nobody suspects the Spanish Inquisition.
But I don't follow your religion now.
Right.
I decided to denounce it.
Right.
But we're in power, so we don't care.
Right.
Like, you get to be tortured anyway.
I'm an independent nation. No, you're not.
No, I don't think so.
No, you're not.
You can think that, but Cave N asks, can a weird community or community leader exile and or place a black mark on a member of their family to warn other weird communities if said member attempts to abuse their open door family system? Similar to the other tribal systems, or really any family system, it is possible to exile members of your family. Since everybody in a settlement is treated as family as a member of the weird, you can exile members of your family.
Yeah, you can
And
totally.
for the weird, exile is
That's a horrible thing.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
You become,
You're literally nobody at that point because
Well,
you're not
somebody.
one of the weird,
and
or
you're
not the weird.
Yeah, you're not the weird
You're
anymore.
permanently living in a disguise at that point because that would not be good. Loop asks, what happens if King significantly changes the environment or culture of a tribe in his realm? Will the NPs living there always adapt lawfully to this, or will they revolt? For example, if a Naren king decides to cut down all the trees, will then the NPC Kipik part of the population rebel? Is there another occupation? There is not. That's the end. Each NPC has their own personality, and it's related to the big 5 personality traits. And so some of them will go along willfully. Those that are more open and more interested in doing the things that are going to be less. We're on the last page. Less prone to conflict, they'll just go with it. Those who are less open will probably fight back.
Right. It generally would behoove you, if you want to do something peacefully, that you do it slowly over time and start to gain support for each of the baby steps that you want to take along the way. If you come in and do something like bold and broad and far-reaching, then you're going to have a lot more people that take a front to that.
And the frog will jump out. It's an old paradigm. If you slowly raise the water temperature with a frog in a pot of water, it won't jump out. It'll slowly boil to death. But if you put it in a pot of hot water, then it'll just jump out.
Right.
I don't know if that's actually true or not, but it's this old,
Is that really the best
it's probably, I'm sure Mythbusters has probably
analogy?
identified.
But I'm saying is that,
It is a great analogy. If you come
remember,
into it...
if anyone tries to change your tribe,
It depends on
they're
what you're
trying
going
to kill
for.
you.
Either boil the frog or don't.
Right.
But
Either
it's up to
way.
you.
Yeah.
Either way, you're going to die.
The point is, if
You're
you
the
do it
frog.
slowly, people might not notice or complain as much as if you just come right in and be like, that's it, I'm changing all the laws. Then they will notice the sudden difference, and they will respond accordingly.
Yes.
All right. Ithakari asks, are some tribe NPCs more likely to join a school, guild, or association over other tribes? Like, say, would a Teresk likely join a school to take ideas and expand upon them by themselves, or not join a school at all? Or would a Naren be more likely to join schools more than other tribes?
Absolutely.
I think we talked about that in each of the write-ups. Some NPC or some tribes don't typically use schools at all, and they tend to rely on the family to teach each other, like the Weird. So even if somebody were to place a school that was not kind of a Weird communal school inside of the Weird environment, they likely wouldn't do it at all. Actually, the Weird would probably adopt it, but the Teresk would not. Like, if you put a school inside the Teresk region, they'd probably still pass it on from parent to child because that's how they do things. So yeah, each tribe will definitely respond differently to how schools are used.
Depends on how they view self-improvement in
Right.
a cultural level.
Yeah.
Mandos asks, is altering or changing completely a religion within a tribe something that can be done on a monarch noble level, or will it take convincing of the tribe's people, or both? Yes. The answer is yes to both. It can be done holistically, but it will take the participation of the tribe's members. You'll have to convince
See
people.
our answer about the frog
Right.
boiling.
All right. How we doing on time, Kaizen?
Yeah, let's finish these 2 up.
All right, we got 2 more questions left.
Cool.
So the Morosi asks, from a previous Q&A, I was wondering about funerary rites and why it hasn't been included in the tribe's culture, assuming they exist in-game. Do they not have a preference? Are the Hrothi crypt builders, or do they go out at the surface to make pyres? Burial would be hard on swamp areas as it would be on hard frozen soil. Maybe religions have set funeral rites. Death has always been a huge thing on early civilizations. Why wouldn't it be a part of Elyria, where player death, permadeath, actually means something? Players will probably want to mourn their recently deceased friends, and tribal info would have been a nice place to see the funeral rites.
Did we not include
we
information
didn't.
on the
We
dross?
didn't.
We didn't.
The dross.
We did include that they do have a process of getting the bones
Yeah.
Right.
from their ancestors,
Yeah.
in particular. Yeah, so we did mention it there, but we didn't mention it
Right.
really elsewhere. It's good to note again that the write-ups that are out there on the tribes is not all of the information that is ever going to be ever released on the tribes before launch, and that we will continue to develop them and release more information about each one as we continue to work on them, as things get nailed down during our testing and stuff. So this is something that we could totally address. Have we really gone deeply into it on a lot of the tribes? No, we talked about it on a few of them because they did have particular
A few of
things.
them we did go into it at fairly great depth.
Yeah, so, and we mentioned some of it, really just the dross, but there's more information
Yeah.
in the future for you.
I appreciate the call out though.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah.
I think it's important.
It's
to keep in mind.
absolutely
It is very
important.
important, and it's going to be important to not only to the mechanics but also to the story.
Yeah.
And each tribe does have their specific way of handling them. It's not going to be as diverse as I think a lot of them. I mean, for many of them, they just bury them. Others, they cremate them and things like that. So there's going to be, I think, probably fewer options. It's not going to be very tribe specific, but it is something that we thought about and talked about it at length for some of them in particular.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that your character does have a life cycle, that they have a legacy, that people know about souls in the Akashic Record to some extent, like, those are going to feature in the way that Illyrians picture death and picture, that great journey. So it's definitely going to come up.
I'm just going to say 2 words and then nothing else about this. Sky Burial. You can look that up. All right.
Cool.
Idiotic Mad Dog.
Printers.
Idiotic, God, I can't pronounce anything today. Idiotic Mad, that is not apple juice either. Idiotic Mad Dog asks, how will intra-tribal casus belli work differently for the Weird when they are of a collectivist nature and have no interest in individual and personal conquest? Will all other means of achieving CB be disabled for the Weird other than time where there is a power vacuum? Can there even be intertribal conflict within the Weird in the same kingdom other than the time where there is a power vacuum?
Well, I can guarantee you that there could be intertribal conflict.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because people are involved.
Yes. So, within the Weird, or really within any tribe, you have to remember that the tribe is different from the political structure. What I mean by that is tribes are a cultural thing. They have their own system of advancement, and oftentimes those will align with the kingdoms themselves. So, for example, within the Narrans in the Grassland, they have their culture, and then there's also the kingdom, and those will mirror each other very closely. But as you know, there are regions that have multiple tribes living within a single kingdom, and shortly after launch, that's going to mix and match a lot. It's already fairly diverse. With there being settlements, there are a combination of different members of different tribes living among them. And so it's important to note that just because the tribes have their cultural way of doing things doesn't necessarily mean that the kingdom laws are going to reflect that. And so casus belli really is like, do I have a reason to invade and declare war on this other region? And if that region is mostly made up of casus belli, not casus belli, if that region is primarily made up of one tribe or another, doesn't really determine whether or not there is a legal basis for which you can invade one tribe or invade one kingdom or domain versus another. In other words, in general, most of the mechanics for casus belli are not tribe specific. There will be some tribe specific ones that we add in, but in general, the whole point of the casus belli is to maintain some sense of normality across the kingdoms, so that people aren't constantly declaring war on each other and invading each other. Like, we want that to happen at key points in the story as a result of things that are happening and that the players have done, but we don't want this constant state of like flux where everybody's declaring war on everybody else and everybody's invading, and it's just chaos everywhere.
Right.
That's not what we're going for. And so in order for us to prevent that, we need kind of a universal, uniform set of laws that all of them believe in, and that like at the
And this project is ambitious as it is. We don't need
Yeah.
to create 12 different games by creating 12 different tribes. So most of the mechanics are going to work across everyone.
Yeah. So I think that's the end of the curated questions that Kaizen pulled out from like the top 20 or 30 questions that we had from our Q&A thread. So now, Kaizen, if you'd be so kind, I don't know whether or not we got a chance to get some good questions from Twitch as follow-up questions, but let's go ahead and get those asked and answered.
Yeah, we have a couple Twitch questions. Director Drake Steele asks, for those of us dead set on living and growing with one of the lost tribes, can we withhold our current EP investments until those tribes are available for us to invest in?
Nope. Short answer.
It was a short answer.
We've got a couple of people who have requested the ability to do that. But what's important to note is that we're really using that EP to build up the world as it exists at launch, and that if we let people postpone and hold off on that, then it creates an environment where after launch, people who've kind of played passively up till that point are now suddenly going to jump in and become a new force to reckon with. And that's okay, but we really don't want you guys focusing on what's going to happen later on. We want you focusing on the story as it exists on launch day. And so really, like always, any EP that's not spent from exposition is going to be converted into story points to be used later on. Now, does that mean you can't use the story points later on? No, you could use the story points in order to take over position of power later on, but it's not going to go through the same kingdom and domain settlement selection process. It's not going to be based on any particular order of influence. It's really just a first come, first serve as soon as the fog of war is lifted on that specific tribe. So for the purpose of simplicity, for us, as well as for you guys, just assume that if you haven't used your EP by the time launch begins and exposition ends, that it's going to be converted to story points at a much lower rate than what you would have expected with EP. I don't recommend planning on doing that. I would say just use it, be a part of the settlements that exist at launch, be a part of the story, and don't wait, because it could be months, it could be years until the specific tribe you're waiting for could be out, and that's not something that we want to be having to weigh in on for the next several years. So
what if there was kind of a generic, this is just speaking off the cuff, we've obviously not discussed this, but what about including just some very generic bonuses, saying okay, well, we haven't discovered the Yoru, but I'm somebody who's interested and invested in the Yoru, and I would like to invest in their military during the time between exposition and when they're discovered. And so when that server finds the Yoru, they have a little bit more invested in their military or something, or their science.
That takes away our ability to balance.
Yeah, I feel like the return on investment, that's really low. It would require a lot of extra mechanics for us to allow us to guide the other tribes. Plus, we don't have them included in the settlement and domain selection. They're not something there. So how do we decide which players get to influence the kind of background workings of the other tribes that aren't there? Or what if they put all their resources into making the Yoru militaristic, and then we end up finding all the other tribes first, and they feel like they haven't been able to participate in that. I feel like that the best thing to do in that case is just to say exposition. I mean, I'll be honest, exposition is something that we still value highly. We still want players to come in and help build out the world and customize them, but exposition, I think, is one of the things, or one of the features and mechanics of the game that players are most, not confused about, but I think it's one of the most conflicted topics because it does have mechanics to it that a lot of players perceive as pay to win. And I think if we continue to propagate this idea that players can either before launch or after launch, submit some amount of money in order to gain influence later on after launch, that we're continuing to propagate that idea that people can buy into that. And I don't want to do that anymore. I feel like players who are participating in exposition have an opportunity to build out the world and kind of expand it and shape it somewhat to the way that they want, but really it's about shaping it to the way we want, but just really being the manpower behind that, helping to make the world interesting on our behalf. And that's something that once that's done, it's done, and I don't want to keep revisiting that mechanic. I think that we've experimented with it, and I think we like the idea of it, but it'll be interesting after the first time we do it to see whether or not it's really a good long-term strategy, or whether or not we experimented with an idea of exposition and then ultimately decide that for future games it's not something that we'll do. So I don't know yet, but at this point I think the best thing to do is assume that you need to use all of your EP during exposition, or otherwise you might not have it available to use it later.
They are called exposition points, right?
They're exposition points.
They're used during
exposition points.
All right,
Only.
probably a safe idea to use them during exposition, I guess.
I mean, if we're going to go strictly by the name.
I would hope so.
Right.
Okay.
Kaizen.
Well, let's do one more question, and don't forget, Caspian will be in Discord immediately after the broadcast, taking some of your questions as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Sure you had forgotten.
No, I had not. I'm looking forward to it. I haven't been in Discord a lot lately, so
Do you want to go into Discord?
I will.
too?
Yeah, but there may be others in the studio as well.
What are you doing right now?
She's volunteering you. There may be other members in the studio who are going to be on Discord as well, but I do plan to dedicate at least a half hour to jumping in and answering additional questions. So if you didn't get your question asked or answered during this live Q&A, feel free to join us afterwards. And if you are watching this on YouTube after the fact, sorry you missed it. So,
All right, Lord Markov asks, how will communal buildings work with private property? For example, if a land parcel on where the town hall is built is privately owned, what happens if the owner decides to sell or wants to destroy the town hall?
So it functions a lot like it does in our world, which is actually interesting because my wife is actually now a commissioner on one of the local cities and has been talking and providing feedback on how this should work. So we've got kind of another subject area expert. But within a settlement, you have the opportunity to annex or incorporate the land around you in order to bring those in and gain value from the city's legal system, gain value from the settlements, like buffs, passive bonuses that you get from the different buildings and things like that. So when you go ahead and incorporate your land, you become part of that, and you gain those benefits. But you do also give up the ability to control what happens on that land to some degree, depending on how that land is incorporated. So if you're incorporating it as like a commercial area, then it kind of falls into the city council or the town council. If you're incorporating it as personal land, then when you do that, you would still have the ability to do things, but you wouldn't be building communal buildings on it. That'd be like me offering up my land to build a school on, and then after the school is built on it, going, oh, that's my school now. And so it's important to note that when you bring land into a settlement like that, whether or not it's kept as personal land or whether or not it's made communal land will dictate what types of buildings you can build on it, what kind of buildings the settlement itself will want you to build on it, and ultimately, if you do commit that land as kind of communal land, then you effectively lose control over that, insofar as you still have voting rights. You know, every person who commits land has some percentage of the voting rights on the council. So if you say, I think my land that I committed should be used for this, and that gains the majority vote, then obviously it still will. But if you submit that land and you're outvoted on what that land will be used for, that's kind of part of, that's one of the cons of being a part of a larger settlement like that. So hopefully I answered that question. I guess that's it for today. This was the last of 4 Q&As on tribes by the staff and developers here at Soulbound Studios. I don't know when our next Q&A will be or what the topic is, but as always, we look forward to the next one. We hope we get a chance to chat with you guys about other upcoming things. And then as a final announcement, for those of you who are waiting for the State of Elyria, note that the State of Elyria address will go out on Wednesday in place of Vye's usual product update. So you will not see a production journal from Vye. Instead, you will see the State of Elyria by myself, and that'll be on Wednesday, I suspect late afternoon or early evening at some point. So look forward to that. Other than that, I think that's everything for us. And
Yeah.
we'll see you guys in Discord, and until next time.
Yeah,
Thanks,
have a good one, guys.